Civil War has ruffled a lot of feathers, but for reasons that I honestly didn't expect. When I first saw the trailer for Civil War, I wasn't too interested in it because I figured it was going to be something very typical condemnation of a particular group in this current day and time. One of the most popular groups to demonize and vilify, especially within the Hollywood community, mainstream media, is right-wingers, or people that don't think exactly the way, let's say, a leftist does. This has become a really big problem here, especially among journalists, which is interesting because this entire movie, really the basis of this movie, it's not even necessarily about whatever it was that caused the conflict that brought about this civil war in this particular time frame of the film. It's really about journalists, specifically war journalists. So when I saw the trailer for it, the way it was constructed made me think it was going to be a narrative on the things that are dividing America and and it's going to be very heavy-handed in its narrative about certain groups. So I wasn't too interested because I'm fairly sick of that, to be honest. It's been going on far too long, and it really is causing a lot of division in this country, which I'm not a fan of at all. Yet I started hearing that it might not be what you think. And so it's like, okay, let's see. Before I went to go see it, I observed that there were some movie critics or other people like, let's say, on Twitter, who were not happy with the film at all. And I saw that it was dividing people, which is funny. So typical. Anyway, I went to go check it out tonight with my brother, and I will start right off by saying something that many of you have probably already heard. This film does not ask you at all to choose sides. This film doesn't even give you a specific narrative as far as what is dividing the country. There are a few little things sprinkled here and there that give you somewhat of an idea, but certainly nothing that's clear enough to make you think, oh yes, this is left versus right. This is blue versus red. Wasn't that way at all. Getting back to what I said about there being little glimmers or hints of maybe what it was that caused this conflict to begin with, I thought I heard someone in the movie referring to Portland Maoists. I might have misunderstood that or just misheard it, but there was also reference to something along the lines of things not getting to the point that they got until the president had disbanded the FBI, or insinuations that the president was basically dictatorial. And I found it interesting that his disbanding of the FBI caused this conflict when, since the beginning of the FBI, when it was under the reign of J. Edgar Hoover, and even up to today, the FBI has been a tremendous violator of civil rights and has done so many unconstitutional things. I just found it interesting that the director would have chosen the president's disbanding of the FBI as something that played into the conflict getting to the point that it did, when a tyrannical president would use a tyrannical arm of the government, like what happens with the FBI, especially nowadays. It's pretty bad. And I wonder if that was an intentional choice to try to separate this story from the reality of things that have gone on and are going on in this country, or if it was just something that stemmed from perhaps a lack of knowledge or understanding about what has been going on. Anyway, those were just a few thoughts I had about that comment that was thrown out. Okay, back to the video. This film is really about war journalism and the lengths that some journalists go to capture war footage. It's about this group of journalists who are on a trip, or cross country or a road trip, not necessarily completely cross country, but they're on a road trip to go to Washington, D.C. to try to get an interview with the president. There's like two states that are basically leading the division in the country, and it is California and Texas, which is funny, right? I mean, they're so diametrically opposed that you know that this is set definitely in an alternate universe, and definitely not based on anything in today's time that is dividing the country, which I think was actually a pretty smart move on the part of Alex Garland. Some people are upset that he didn't pick a side, that he chose two states to team up together. That makes no sense because they never would have. But basically, we have no framework for what it is that has caused this schism in the country. And I appreciate that he did that, because that basically took the focus off of that sort of stuff and just showed you this story of these journalists that are putting themselves in harm's way, ridiculously so, I might add. I just don't get it with them, but that's the basis of the story. These journalists, these photojournalists that are capturing momentous times in history and showing some of the shots that they get. I liked how this film was put together. I appreciate the cinematography of it. I thought it was very well done. I liked how there were moments where certain things would be happening and, dangerous, like confrontations and violence and stuff. And it would stop the action at the moment where the photographer was taking a picture, and you would see the shot that was captured. Then there were other times where it didn't even show you the action from the point of view of the audience, like what you would be normally seeing if you're watching a movie, but it showed you the action as it happened in photographs. So there are events that take place and you only see it through the lens of the camera in photographic form. I thought that was pretty interesting. The flow of the film, I've seen some people say that this movie was boring, and part of me can understand why some people would have this sentiment. The trailer gives you the impression that it's a lot more actiony and, intense than it really is. You spend a lot of time with these four journalists as they're on the road and just seeing the things that they're observing and the things that they're talking about. And there's this one journalist who's young. She's very new. She's up and coming. And the very jaded journalist played by Kirsten Dunst, takes her under her wing, kind of teaches her the ropes. Basically, you're viewing the movie through the eyes of this young journalist who's experiencing all of this horrific stuff for the first time. And it's very shocking. And then, of course, that character has an arc or growth arc that she goes through. And so by the end of the movie, she is a completely different person than she was at the beginning. I can't necessarily say that I like this character, because there are things that she does through the course of the story that annoy me. The positions of danger that she begins to put herself in, therefore causing danger to other people. And that actually really got under my skin, and I found myself actively wanting something to happen to her because I was getting really tired of her character. Anyway, the film doesn't necessarily go in the direction that I would like, but I did find certain things interesting. There's a moment in time where stuff is happening in Washington, D.C., and it was very sobering to see events of great violence happening to certain landmarks in Washington, D.C. as forces are converging on the Capitol and things are coming to a head. So it really, even though this film doesn't necessarily go into specifics as to what causes the Civil War, it does make you stop and think about what it would really be like in our lifetime if something like that happens, and how terrible it would be. And maybe it would be a good thing if reasonable heads can prevail more often than not, because a lot of times, especially in politics, it feels like they are not. And it's interesting that the focus of this film was on journalists, when pretty much the number one problem in this country that is causing division is the media, the news media, journalists who don't abide by the ethics of their profession and instead adhere to their own personal and political biases and create division, create narratives that are not true, and just basically pit people against each other, make people hate each other, and politicians that also tap into that because, it helps them get elected. It's really a shame that it's like that, but at the same time, it feels like it's very much in line with human nature. Humans are tribalistic in nature, and this is it's just that sort of thing playing out, even though it's frustrating to witness because you have people that don't necessarily want to go to either extreme. They want to just have a more moderate type of thought or nuanced thinking because they realize that not everything is pure black and white. And even those people are vilified because it's like the extremes of either side want them to be on their side, and you have a lot of people, most people, I think, that are in the middle who just want to think for themselves, don't want to be told what to think, and are getting tired of being vilified for not coming down on whatever particular lines of thought there are that divide people so often. There were certain moments that it showed when things would be happening, really horrific and awful things would be happening, and you would see one of the characters would just be maybe lying down in the grass, and there's flowers and pretty things around, and yet there's all this carnage and awful stuff happening around them. And just the juxtaposition of that imagery, it just kind of, it was like, wow, nature finds a way to go on despite what a lot of humans do to each other. There's always going to be pretty flowers, even though people are killing each other. I just thought that was kind of, I don't know, that was just the thought that came to me when I saw some of those shots. I had seen that there was an interview that Kirsten Dunst did where I think it was her that was saying that this movie was a love letter to journalists. And I would personally paraphrase that to say, it's a love letter to what journalism should be. Just capturing moments in time with an unbiased lens, not trying to tell us what to think or how to think, but just showing us these things. This is the thing, and letting people draw their own conclusions about what's going on. So maybe in that sense, that's what it's a love letter to. But journalists of today, as far as I'm concerned, especially journalists in Western media in the United States in particular, actual ethical journalists that just remove their own personal thoughts about a particular thing throughout the course of their job, those people are extremely rare, very hard to find. I do believe they are on the cusp of going extinct. So I don't know how much of a love letter one really wants to write to journalists, maybe sort of a love letter to the aspiration of what journalists should be aiming for or whatever. That was just something that came to me. I did see also that it looked like some of the actors in here, well, especially Kirsten and maybe Offerman, were not wanting to follow along with the narrative that this is about a particular president or this is about a particular group of people. This is just about these journalists. So I appreciated that they didn't open their mouth and just talk a lot of silly stuff that is only going to make people angry, and basically presented to us what the movie really is about. So I thought that was interesting. I'm curious to see how well this movie is going to do, how divisive it really is going to end up being. From what I can tell, the official critics and the audience in general do both agree that this is a good film, an enjoyable film. It's definitely not going to be for everybody. It's not super action-packed. There are moments where it does feel like it's a bit draggy, but that's largely because they're doing all this character development and showing these people in this world, and this is mostly a character drama, honestly. There's really only a few times where some things happen. There was a very intense scene involving the character that Jesse Plemons plays, the real-life husband of Kirsten Dunst. He is not in this movie very much, so don't go in there thinking he's going to play a big part, probably less than 10 minutes. And then there is some action stuff that happens at the end, as things are building to a climax. But it was interesting. I certainly didn't hate this film. I appreciated it. I wasn't super in love with it. It's not necessarily something that I would feel like returning to time and time again, but I certainly don't feel like it was a waste of my time, and it was fairly well made and well acted and an interesting storyline, and presented things to the audience that kind of makes you stop and think, and is pretty sobering in that respect. I did appreciate that as well. Anyway, I think that's about it. Can't think of anything else to say, so I'm wrapping this one up. Later, guys.